The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I almost missed it. I was out on the back porch with my second cup of coffee, watching the neighbor's dog dig up the flower bed along the fence for the third time that week, when my phone buzzed on the little wrought iron table beside me. The screen said, Claire. I picked it up without thinking twice because Claire never called before noon, not since she'd started that new job at the dental office and her mornings were packed from the moment she walked in the door. Dad, she said, and just that one word was enough. Not because of what it meant or what came after it. It was the way she said it. Quiet, smaller than her actual voice, like she'd shrunk the word down to fit inside a space where nobody else could hear it. Claire, I said, talk to me. There was a pause. I could hear something in the background. Movement, maybe footsteps on a hard floor, like she was walking to a room where she could close a door. Dad, she said again, and this time her voice cracked right down the middle. He sold my car. He actually did it. It's gone. I set the coffee mug down on the table very carefully, the way you do when your hands are starting to shake and you don't want anything to spill or break. The dog next door had stopped digging. The morning had gone completely still. Which car? I asked, though I already knew. The Civic, the blue one. It was in the driveway last night, and this morning it was just gone, Dad. And he said he had to. He said they had bills, and he said it was in his name, and I said, Dad, I said, Claire. My voice was steadier than I felt. Is he there right now? He's in the kitchen. All right, listen to me very carefully. She listened, and I started thinking very fast. If you'd told me 2 years before that Tuesday morning that I'd be standing on my back porch shaking with controlled fury while my daughter whispered to me from a locked bathroom, I would have told you that you had the wrong family. I would have told you that I'd raised her to be careful, to be strong, to never let a man make her feel small. I would have told you a lot of things. Sitting here in my decent little house in Millhaven, Ohio, with my retirement check deposited every first of the month, and my name on the deed, and my tools still oiled in the garage. But I would have been wrong, because love does things to people. Love makes them patient in ways they shouldn't be. Love makes them explain things away that shouldn't be explained. And nobody, not a careful father, not a strong woman, not anyone, is immune to that. So before I tell you what happened that Tuesday, let me take you back to where this story really starts. My name is Gerald Holt. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in Millhaven, Ohio, for the last 31 years. I worked for 22 of those years as a licensed electrician, mostly commercial, some residential, and before that I spent 6 years in the United States Army, 2 of them stationed in places I'm still not entirely comfortable naming at a dinner table. I'm not a big man. I'm about 5'11". I've got the kind of hair that went fully gray before I was 50. And most people, when they first meet me, think I'm the quiet type. The kind of man who fades into the furniture at a party. The kind who might have been handsome once, but now is just pleasant and harmless and slightly boring. I've spent a fair portion of my adult life allowing people to think exactly that, because that underestimation has been useful to me on more occasions than I can count. My wife, Helen, passed away 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There isn't a day I don't think about her, but I've learned to carry that weight in a way that doesn't cripple me. She would have hated for it to cripple me. She was always more practical about grief than I was. She used to say, Gerald, mourning is for the ones left behind. Don't make it a career. Even at the end, she was more worried about how I'd manage the grocery shopping than about anything that was happening to her. That was Helen. That was exactly who she was. After she passed, it was just me and Claire. We were already close, but grief has a way of welding people together. Claire was 26 when her mother died. She took a week off work, came home to Millhaven, helped me clear out her mother's things, a process that took 4 days because every single sweater had a story, and then went back to Columbus, where she'd been living. We called each other every Sunday. We visited every holiday. We had a system, Claire and I, and it worked. If you've ever been afraid for someone you love, that specific gut-level fear that you can't logic your way out of, the kind that shows up at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest until morning, then you already know a piece of what I'm going to tell you. And if you want to stay with me until the end, I hope you will, because this story matters to me more than almost anything I've ever said out loud. Before I go any further, if you've already felt something in these first few sentences, If something in this story is already familiar to you, I want to ask you something. Leave a like on this video. Leave me a comment and tell me if you've ever stood in that silence, that specific silence, knowing something was wrong but not yet knowing how wrong, and if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this one, stories about ordinary people, ordinary families, the hidden things that happen behind decent-looking doors, deserve to be heard. They deserve witnesses. And I'm grateful you're here. Now let me tell you about the 2 years that led up to that Tuesday morning phone call. My life in Millhaven, by the time any of this started, had settled into something I'd describe as peacefully unremarkable. I woke up at 5:30 most mornings out of a habit I'd never managed to break after the Army, even though I'd been retired from commercial work for 2 years by then. I'd make coffee, the same brand, the same drip machine, the same ancient ceramic mug that Helen had picked up at a church sale in 2004, and I'd sit with the dog, a 10-year-old beagle named Copperhead who had strong opinions about where he sat and no opinions about anything else. I'd read the paper, or more often the news on my phone, which I still navigated with 2 fingers, like it was something that might bite me. Twice a week, I volunteered at the Millhaven Veterans Resource Center on Maple Street, doing administrative work mostly. Paperwork, phone calls, connecting former service members with housing and healthcare benefits. It wasn't glamorous. It was mostly fluorescent lights and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long, and men and women who were carrying things they didn't always have words for yet. But I was good at it, and it filled the quiet hours in a way that didn't feel hollow. I had some savings, more than most people would have guessed, because I'd been careful and deliberate about money my entire adult life, and because my needs, since Helen passed, were genuinely modest. The house was paid off. The truck was paid off. I had accounts I didn't talk about because there wasn't any reason to, and because I'd learned a long time ago that money is one of those things that changes how people look at you, and I preferred people to look at me the way they actually did, as a pleasant, slightly boring retired electrician with a beagle and too many opinions about the weather. My daughter, Claire Louise Holt, was 28 when she called me to say she was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving. She still is, one of the sharpest people I've ever known. And I say that not just because she's mine. She has her mother's instincts, the ability to read a room in 10 seconds, and she has my stubbornness, which is either a gift or a curse depending on the day. She was working then as a dental office administrator in Columbus, managing schedules and billing and a staff of 8, with an efficiency that I was deeply proud of and only slightly terrified by. She had the kind of competence that made things around her run smoothly, and she made it look effortless in the way that only truly effortful people can. She'd mentioned Ryan before, once in September, twice in October, always with a kind of careful brightness in her voice, like she was testing how the name sounded before she really committed to it. Ryan Carver, 29 years old, sales manager at a mid-sized supply company in Columbus. Tall, she said. Funny, confident. Made her laugh. "I like him, Dad," she'd said on our Sunday call in early November. "Then I'll like him too," I said, "because that's what you say, and because part of me meant it." He arrived that Thanksgiving in a car I didn't recognize, a silver Audi, newer model, which I noticed only because it was slightly at odds with what Claire had said about him having some student loan things he was still sorting out. He was tall, as advertised, dark-haired, good-looking in a straightforward way, the kind of face that photographs well. He had a handshake that was just a fraction too firm, the way some men do it when they want to make a point, and he smiled at me like I was someone he'd decided in advance to be patient with. "Mr. Holt," he said, "Claire talks about you all the time." "She talks about you too," I said. "Come on in." He walked into my house and looked around the way some people do, not rudely, not openly, but with the quick, assessing glance of a man cataloging what he's seeing. The furniture, the floors, the truck in the driveway. I noticed it, and then I set it aside, because I am not the kind of father who decides he dislikes a man before the turkey is carved. Dinner was good. Helen's stuffing recipe, which I've made every year since she taught it to me, which I still occasionally get wrong in small ways that I notice and nobody else does. Ryan talked more than Claire, which wasn't unusual for him, I'd later learn. He had a lot to say about his company, about the sales strategies he was implementing, about the market trends in commercial supply that I was honest enough to be genuinely uninterested in. But he was engaged. He asked me questions. He laughed at the right moments. He helped clear the table without being asked, and I gave him credit for that. It was only later, when we were doing the dishes and Claire had stepped outside to take a call, that he said the thing that lodged itself in the back of my mind like a splinter. "Claire's told me you've been retired for a couple of years," he said, drying a plate with the dish towel like he'd done it 100 times. "That's nice. Must be relaxing." "It has its moments," I said. "She worries about you, you know, being out here alone." He paused, and there was a beat in that pause that I felt more than heard. "She's got a good heart, Claire does. Always looking out for the people she loves." "That's true," I said. "Good thing she's doing well enough," he added, almost as an afterthought, almost as if it had just occurred to him. "That way she doesn't have to worry about, extra responsibilities." He smiled when he said it. A pleasant smile. The kind that's designed to make the other person feel like they're imagining the edge underneath it. I handed him another plate to dry and let the silence do its work. And I filed that comment away in a place where I keep things I'm not done thinking about yet. That was November. By the following April, they were engaged. By September, they were married in a small ceremony in Columbus that I helped pay for, because Claire asked me, and because it was my daughter, and because I wanted to, not because I had to. A distinction I understood even then, even when nobody else did. I want to be clear about something, because I think it's important to be honest here. I gave Ryan the full benefit of the doubt for a long time. When he made comments about my truck being old, I let it go. When he started referring to my house as out in the country, with a tone that made it sound like a diplomatic way of saying something less kind, I let it go. When he told Claire, once, in my kitchen, while I was standing at the stove with my back to them, that she really needed to stop over-planning around your dad, because he wasn't her responsibility, I stood very still for a moment and then put the lid back on the pot and turned around and changed the subject because Claire looked like she wanted the floor to absorb her. I let it go. Again and again, across 6 months of small, accumulating moments, I let it go. Because Claire was happy, or something that looked enough like happiness that I couldn't be certain it wasn't. Because Helen would have told me not to make it a project. Because I wasn't sure I wasn't seeing things through the particular over-vigilant lens of a father who didn't fully want to let his daughter belong to someone else. That's the honest truth, and I'm not proud of the length of time it took me to see past it. The Christmas after they married, they came to Millhaven for 4 days. Ryan spent a portion of those 4 days on his phone, calls, emails, the particular tightened look of a man managing something he doesn't want to talk about. Claire made excuses for it, the way she'd started doing by then in a way I noticed, but didn't push on. "He's got a big quarter coming up," she'd say. "You know how it is with sales targets." On Christmas Eve, we were all in the living room. Claire, Ryan, me, Copperhead doing his ritual inspection of Ryan's shoes, and I'd poured some brandy and put on the kind of old Christmas music Helen used to love. Ryan had loosened up a little, the way people sometimes do when they've eaten well, and the room is warm, and there's nowhere they have to be. He talked about the new year, about goals for the upcoming year, about a condo in a better part of Columbus that he'd been looking at. "We'd need some help with the down payment," he said, not looking at me when he said it. "The market's brutal right now." "It is," I agreed. "Claire says you've got some savings put away." This time he did look at me, direct, comfortable, like the question was perfectly natural. I looked back at him. "A little," I said. He nodded slowly. "Well, if you ever wanted to, help the kids out." That smile again. "We'd pay you back, obviously." "Obviously," I said. I didn't say anything else. Claire was looking at the wall above the fireplace with the careful attention of someone who had not started this conversation and desperately wished it was not happening. Ryan drained his brandy glass and shrugged, easy and dismissive. "Just a thought, though to be honest, I don't even know what you'd have to offer at this point." A small laugh. "No offense." "None taken," I said. He refilled his own glass and went back to his phone, and I sat in Helen's chair and looked at the Christmas tree and thought, with a clarity that surprised me, that this was a man who had already decided exactly what I was worth, and the number he'd arrived at was very low, and that sooner or later, that certainty was going to become a problem. Easter came and went. A dinner at their apartment in Columbus. A nice place, actually. Nicer than the salary Claire had described would have made entirely easy, where Ryan spent most of the meal talking about a project at work that had fallen through because people above him didn't understand vision. I noticed that Claire refilled his glass twice without being asked, each time with the small, automatic movement of someone who has learned to anticipate a mood. I noticed, and I stored it. In June, I was sitting in my truck in their parking lot, waiting for Claire to come down because we were going to lunch, just the two of us. Ryan had left for work. I was early. I was reading something on my phone, comfortable and warm, windows down, when I heard Ryan's voice. He was on the far side of the parking structure near the stairwell. He hadn't seen my truck. He was on the phone, walking in the small, tight circle that people pace when they're stressed and trying to contain it. "Yeah, I know," he was saying. "I know what I said. But the numbers aren't there, man. And she's not going to understand the whole picture." A pause. "No, the car's mine. Both names are on the title, but I've got power of attorney for the financial stuff. She signed it when Yeah, the Civic. I've got a buyer. Just need to move it this week before..." He stopped walking. He'd turned and seen my truck. Our eyes met across the parking lot. He said something quick and quiet into the phone and ended the call. Then he walked toward me with his hands loose at his sides and the particular careful expression of someone choosing, in real time, how to handle a situation. "Gerald," he said, "I thought you weren't coming until noon." "I'm a little early," I said. "Good morning, Ryan." A pause. "How long have you been sitting there?" "Long enough," I said pleasantly, "to know that this is going to be an interesting conversation." He stared at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, the smile wasn't quite there. I let him stand in that silence for a long moment, the way you let a knot work itself loose, and then I said, "Go ahead to work. I'll talk to Claire." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked to his car and left. I sat there in my truck for 4 or 5 minutes, alone. Copperhead wasn't with me that day. The parking lot was quiet. A pigeon was doing something purposeful near the dumpster. I breathed slowly and thought about Helen, briefly, not about what she would have said, but just about her, the fact of her, the way she anchored things even now, even 7 years gone. Then I thought about what I'd heard, and then I stopped feeling anything very much and started thinking very clearly. That old training, the thing the Army put in you that never really leaves, it's not aggression, people get that wrong. It's not a readiness to fight, it's a kind of metabolic shift, a place your mind goes when the situation calls for clarity over feeling. I went there now, quietly, without fanfare, without telling myself any stories about it. I picked up my phone. I called a number I'd had for 15 years, a man named David Archer, who was a real estate attorney in Columbus, and who I'd helped navigate some veterans' benefits back when he was still sorting himself out after coming home from a second deployment. David owed me nothing. I'd never thought of it that way. But he'd made clear more than once that if I ever needed anything, I should call. I called. "David," I said when he answered, "I need to understand something about vehicle titles and power of attorney in Ohio, and I need to understand it in the next 20 minutes. "Gerald," he said without hesitation, "talk to me." Claire came down 10 minutes later. She found me standing beside the truck, phone still warm in my hand. She had on a light summer dress and her mother's earrings, the small gold ones, and she looked bright and easy and unsuspecting, and I felt a complicated thing in my chest that I did not allow onto my face. "You look like you're thinking hard about something," she said, hugging me. "I always look like that," I said. "Come on, let's go somewhere good for lunch." We went to a place called the Cardinal Table on Whitmore Street, a small restaurant that made the kind of food that doesn't try to impress you and does so anyway. We sat across from each other and ordered and talked about her job in the summer and a book she'd been reading. I watched her, not in a way she could see, in the way you watch someone you love when you're trying to memorize them and also trying to calibrate how much of the truth to say and when. When the food came, I said, "Claire, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever the answer is, it doesn't change anything important." She put her fork down. People put their forks down when they know a real question is coming. "Did you sign a power of attorney for Ryan? For financial things?" The color changed in her face, not dramatically. Not a gasp, not a theatrical shift, but I've been watching her face for 28 years, and I know it the way I know the sound of my own truck engine, every variation, every irregularity. He said it was for taxes, she said, and the joint accounts. He said it was just simpler. When did you sign it? January. She picked up her fork, set it back down. Dad. The Civic, I said. The blue one. Is it registered in both your names? There was a long pause. Outside on Whitmore Street, a bus went by. Yes, she said, both names. And you know I bought that car, I said. 3 years ago, before you and Ryan. I bought it for you outright. I paid cash, and I put it in your name. I know, she said, quietly. All right, I said. And I told her, carefully and completely, what I had heard in the parking lot that morning. The silence that followed was long. She looked at her plate. She looked out the window. She looked at her hands. And then she said very quietly, He's been talking about the car for weeks. I thought it was just stress talking. He says things when he's stressed that he doesn't always mean. Has he done that before? I said. Made financial decisions without asking you. A pause that answered the question before she did. There's an account, she said. A joint one. The balance it's lower than it should be. I asked him about it and he said he'd moved money to savings and I believed him, and then I looked and there's no savings account I can find in both our names and She stopped. I didn't want to make it into a thing. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood in the specific way that parents understand things that break their hearts while they're understanding them. There might be some other things, she said, and her voice had gone to that small, shrunk-down register I'd heard on the phone 2 weeks later, on that Tuesday morning. The credit card, and he borrowed against our insurance policy, Dad. He said it was an investment. He said he'd explain it, and then he never did, and I was going to ask again, and... Okay, I said. Okay. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She was shaking slightly, the fine, contained kind of shaking that comes from finally letting a truth out that's been pressing against the walls for too long. Are you afraid of him? I asked. She thought about it. That she had to think about it told me everything I needed to know. Not physically, she said. Not like that. But when he's angry, Dad, there's a way he gets. His voice. And he knows how to make me feel like I'm the one who's not seeing clearly. That's a kind of afraid, I said. She didn't argue with it. We stayed at the Cardinal table for 2 hours that afternoon, long past what our plates required. I told her some things I hadn't told her before, about the accounts in my name, about the fact that her car, regardless of Ryan's power of attorney, had a trail I could document, receipts, bank records, a clear chain of purchase, that complicated any claim he might think he had. I told her about David Archer, who had already, in a 20-minute phone call, sketched out the legal landscape in terms that were encouraging. I also told her something I should have told her earlier. I said, Claire, I should have said something sooner. I noticed things, and I made excuses for them, and I told myself it wasn't my place. That was a mistake. I want you to know that. She shook her head. You couldn't have known. Maybe not everything, I said. But I knew some things. And I was quiet about them to keep the peace, and I'm not going to do that anymore. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said, What do we do? First, I said, we do nothing yet that he can see. Second, you talk to a lawyer, not just David, someone whose job is specifically family law and financial abuse. Third, and I need you to hear this carefully, if at any point you feel unsafe, you do not think about the car or the accounts or the power of attorney. You call me. That's the only thing on the list that never changes. She nodded. We have a word, I said, which was something I hadn't planned to say until I was already saying it, but which felt, once it was out, exactly right. She looked at me. If you call me and something is wrong, if he's there and you can't speak freely, you use the word. You say, remember that summer. That's it. Those 3 words. And I will know. Remember that summer, she repeated. That's it. She looked at me for a long time across the restaurant table, and I thought I could see something shifting in her eyes, the very slow beginning of something resolving itself into a different shape. Not hope exactly, not yet, but a kind of recalibration, the recognition that she was not alone in this. Okay, she said. Okay, Dad. I drove back to Millhaven that evening. It was July, just past the longest days, and the light along Route 40 had that particular quality it gets in Ohio in the summer. Golden and thick and slightly sad, like it's already preparing for fall. Copperhead was waiting at the door when I got home. I fed him and gave him a long scratch behind the ears, and sat in Helen's chair and said, out loud to no one in particular, "Helen, I think I'm going to need to be sharp for a while." The chair didn't answer, but I felt a little less alone. The weeks that followed were careful, deliberate, quiet. I worked with David Archer, who connected me with a family law attorney named Patricia Owens, a small, precise woman who spoke the way surgeons work. Nothing wasted, nothing imprecise, everything exactly where it needed to be. Patricia reviewed what Claire had told me and confirmed what I'd suspected. The power of attorney Ryan had obtained, while technically valid, had significant limitations, particularly concerning the civic, which predated the marriage, predated the power of attorney, and which I could document having purchased outright. The financial movements from the joint account were another matter, and the borrowed insurance value was a third, and together they were building a picture that Patricia said, in her careful, surgical way, speaks to a pattern. I didn't tell Ryan any of this. I didn't change my behavior toward him at all. I remained, to all appearances, the pleasant, slightly boring retired electrician from Millhaven who probably lived close to the edge and might or might not be good for a small informal loan someday. He called me once, in late July. I saw his name on the screen and understood immediately that this was about the car, and that the morning in the parking lot had made him careful rather than scared, which meant he thought I was someone who needed to be managed, not someone who posed any genuine obstacle to what he intended to do. "Gerald," he said, the same easy tone. "Hey, how are you doing out there?" "Fine," I said. "Copperhead's got a vet appointment this week. Other than that, quiet." "Ha, good, good." A pause. "Listen, I wanted to reach out because I know things have been a little... Well, I know you worry about Claire, and I want you to know everything's good. We're in a great place. Genuinely great." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. Another pause, slightly longer. Look, I'll be straight with you. We're thinking about selling the Civic. We don't really need two cars with where we both work now, and frankly, we could use the liquidity. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I let a beat pass. Just one. "I appreciate that," I said. "Yeah, and I know it was your car originally, before the marriage, but you know how it is. These things become joint once people are married, legally speaking. I've looked into it." "Have you?" I said. "Yeah, so I just wanted to keep you in the loop." "Ryan," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you looked into it, did you look into the specific circumstances of an asset purchased prior to the marriage and the limitations on POA authority over premarital property under Ohio statute?" A silence. It was a different quality of silence than the ones we'd had before. "I'm not sure It's fine," I said pleasantly. "Don't worry about it. Tell Claire I said hello." I hung up. I sat in my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly and thought about Helen and about patience and about the fact that doing things in the right order, in the right time, with the right documentation is almost always more effective than doing them loudly. 3 weeks after that phone call, on a Tuesday morning in August, my phone rang. Claire's voice. Small. "He sold my car. He actually did it. It's gone." She'd gone out at 7 in the morning to drive to the pharmacy, and the driveway was empty, and Ryan had told her he'd finalized the sale the evening before, that the buyer had picked it up, that it was a good price, and they needed the money, and he hadn't wanted to argue with her about it again. "He said we'd argued about it," she told me in that locked room voice. "We haven't argued about it, Dad. I told him I didn't want to sell it, and he said fine, and then he did it anyway. Does he know you're calling me?" "No, he's in the kitchen." "Okay, here's what I need you to do right now. I need you to go into the kitchen and tell him calmly that you need the name of the buyer and the sale documentation because you want to review it. Write down whatever he tells you. Don't argue. Don't let him see that anything has changed. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yes." "Good. Then I need you to leave the apartment. Tell him you're going to the pharmacy, which is what you were going to do anyway. Go to the pharmacy. Call me from there." "Okay. Claire." "Yeah. You're okay. I'm already moving. And I was. Even before I hung up the phone, I was already standing, already reaching for my keys, already running through the list in my head. David Archer, Patricia Owens, the folder of documents I'd been building for 6 weeks in the locked drawer of my filing cabinet, the specific names and numbers I needed in a specific order. My hands were steady. My mind was very clear and very cold and very focused in the way I'd trained it to be in a long time ago and apparently never fully untrained. I texted Patricia Owens before I started the truck. It happened. Call me when you can. Call. She called within 4 minutes. I drove to Columbus on a Tuesday morning in August with the windows down and the radio off, talking to Patricia on the Bluetooth for the first 40 minutes about the specific steps we were taking and in what order. The sale of the car, as it turned out, created an actionable situation that we had been, in the careful, deliberate language of attorneys, positioned for. The buyer, Patricia, confirmed she could locate. The sale documentation would have Ryan's signature. The account from which he received the proceeds would be identifiable. And the Civic's original purchase trail, cash, my account, 3 years before the marriage, receipts I had scanned and stored and emailed to Patricia 6 weeks ago, meant that his claim to have sold it cleanly was not as clean as he'd told Claire. I stopped once at a gas station outside Hilliard to fill the tank and splash some water on my face. The day was hot and still and sharp-edged. I looked at my face in the side mirror for a moment, gray hair, a little sun-worn, 63 years of ordinary looking, and thought about Ryan's voice on Christmas Eve. I don't even know what you'd have to offer at this point. No offense. And I thought, without anger, without any particular satisfaction, that he was about to find out. I arrived at Claire and Ryan's building at 10:42 in the morning. I texted Claire. Here. Pharmacy? She replied immediately. Leaving now. 10 mins. I went upstairs alone. I knocked on the apartment door. Ryan opened it in jeans and an old work shirt, looking like a man who'd been on the phone and was not fully prepared for a visitor. His expression cycled through several things in quick succession. Surprise, reassessment, a return to the careful ease he kept handy. Gerald, he said, I didn't know you were coming. I know, I said. May I come in? He stepped back. I walked in and stood in the center of their living room, which I'd been in perhaps a dozen times, and looked around at it, the furniture they'd chosen, the photos on the shelf, the particular ordinariness of a young married couple's home. And then I looked at him. Claire called me this morning, I said. About the car. Right. His voice was modulated, practiced. Look, I know it seems sudden, but we talked about this. Claire understood. She didn't, I said, but that's not actually the primary issue I'm here to discuss. He went still in the way people do when the conversation has moved to a different room than the one they were prepared for. The primary issue, I said, is that the vehicle you sold yesterday morning was purchased with my money from my account in August of 2020 prior to your marriage and placed in Claire's name as a gift, which I can document fully. The secondary issue is that the power of attorney through which you believe you had authority to conduct this sale has significant limitations under Ohio law that I've been discussing with a licensed attorney for the last 6 weeks. And the third issue, Ryan, is the joint account and the insurance policy and the pattern those things together describe. I paused. The room was very quiet. I'm not angry, I said, which was mostly true. And I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because Claire is on her way up, and I think you should understand the situation clearly before she arrives, because the next 30 minutes are going to determine quite a few things. Ryan stared at me. The easy confidence had dropped away, and what was underneath it was younger looking and less certain. He said, you're a retired electrician, Gerald. You don't just... I am a retired electrician, I agreed. I'm also a former staff sergeant with 6 years of federal service and a man who spent the last 6 weeks working with a family attorney and a real estate and title attorney to document a very clear trail. I'm also the person who paid for that car and can prove it. He opened his mouth. Sit down, Ryan, I said quietly. He sat down. Claire came in 8 minutes later. She found Ryan on the couch and me in the chair across from him, and the look on her face when she read that room, the particular silence of it, the shift in the gravity of it, was something I'm going to carry for the rest of my life. She looked at me, and then at Ryan, and then back at me, and she stood a little straighter. Your father, Ryan said, with a voice that was working very hard to sound normal, has some concerns. I know, Claire said. She sat down beside me, across from him. Not beside him. Beside me. The three of us sat in that apartment on a hot August morning and had a conversation that wasn't easy for anyone, including me. Patricia Owens joined on speakerphone when I called her, brief and precise. David Archer had already, by that point, tracked the buyer of the Civic, a private individual in Worthington who had paid $7,000 in cash and who, as Patricia explained calmly over the speaker, was going to receive a very specific letter in the next 24 hours. Ryan did not shout. He didn't threaten. What he did, instead, was something I hadn't quite anticipated, which was that he cried, real tears, or something close enough to real that I couldn't be certain, and he talked about pressure, about the debt he hadn't told Claire about a loan he'd taken without telling her, about a business venture that had gone wrong 9 months ago, and the hole that had been getting bigger ever since. He talked, and Claire listened, and I listened, and when he was done, I said, I'm sorry you were in that position. I understand debt can be crushing, but the answer was never to handle your wife's money and property without her knowledge or consent. He looked at me across the living room. If you'd come to me, I said, if you'd told me you were in trouble and you needed help, I would have helped you. Because you're Claire's husband, and because I don't want anything bad for you. But you didn't come to me. You laughed, actually. On Christmas Eve. Do you remember? He looked at the floor. You told me you didn't know what I'd have to offer, I said. And I let you think that, because it wasn't relevant. But I want you to understand now that it was never about what I could offer. It was about who you were choosing to be in my daughter's life. The police were not called that day. Patricia advised that Claire's strongest position involved the civil and family law processes, rather than a criminal complaint at this stage, though the latter remained an option. Ryan's attorney, a man named Greg, whom I never met in person, contacted Patricia within 48 hours. The Civic buyer was located, the sale was contested, and the vehicle was recovered within 12 days on grounds of improper sale authority, which the buyer, to his genuine credit, accepted without significant resistance once the legal situation was explained. He received his $7,000 back and an apology from Patricia, who I had come to think of as one of the most efficient humans I'd ever encountered. Claire did not go back to the apartment that day. She called 2 friends, Emma and Diane, and drove to Diane's house with 2 suitcases and the composure of a woman who had made a decision she wasn't going to unmake. I sat in the parking lot of Diane's apartment complex and called Patricia, and then called David, and then sat quietly for 10 minutes listening to the city sounds. Then I drove home to Millhaven. The formal processes took 7 months. That's the honest number, and I'm not going to compress it into something tidier than it was, because those 7 months were real and they were difficult in the specific grinding way that legal processes are difficult. Not dramatic, not full of turning points, but slow and detailed and exhausting in a way that asks something of you every single day. Patricia Owens was extraordinary. She assembled the financial picture with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the story had to be completely legible, not just to a judge, but to Claire herself, because part of what happens in situations like this one is that the person who was harmed can lose their trust in their own perception. Seeing it laid out in documents and numbers, in a timeline that was clear and unambiguous, that mattered to Claire in a way that was separate from the legal outcome. We met with Patricia together, Claire and I, in her office on the 7th floor of a building on Broad Street in Columbus. Clean, spare office, a view of the city. Patricia dressed in gray, always precise. Claire had started seeing a therapist by then, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who I knew nothing about except that Claire came home from those appointments looking progressively less like someone managing something and more like someone actually setting it down. The core of the case, Patricia told us in one of those meetings, is actually very clean. The car is documentable, the insurance policy is documentable, the account withdrawals are documentable, the power of attorney was improperly applied. What Ryan's attorney is going to argue is that these were joint financial decisions made in a stressful situation, not deliberate misappropriation. And our counter to that, Claire said, is that I was never consulted. Precisely, Patricia said, and almost smiled. There was a mediation hearing in February. I sat in the waiting area because it was Claire's proceeding, not mine, and I spent 3 hours with a paper cup of bad coffee and a 2-year-old issue of a business magazine I didn't read, and the long, patient kind of waiting that I'd learned in the Army and never entirely lost the discipline of. Claire came out after 3 hours. She sat down beside me. "He's going to pay back the account," she said. "The car recovery stands. The insurance policy. That's going to take longer, but Patricia thinks we get it." "Good," I said. "He said something," she said. She was looking at the wall across from us. "At the end. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said he just felt like he was drowning and he didn't know how to say so." "I know," I said. "I don't hate him, Dad," she said, and she sounded surprised by that, like she'd checked inside herself and found something different than what she expected. "That's okay," I said. "You don't have to. Is it enough to not hate someone?" She looked at me. "Is that forgiveness?" I thought about it for a real moment, not a performing thought moment, but an actual one. "I don't think forgiveness is a single thing you do," I said. "I think it's more like a room you move toward gradually, and whether you get all the way in depends on a lot of things, and none of those things have a deadline." She was quiet. "What I know," I said, "is that you're not obligated to forgive on anyone's timeline but your own, and I know that not hating someone is a perfectly decent place to be standing while you figure out the rest." She took my hand the way she used to when she was small, and we sat there until Patricia came out to tell us the next steps. The divorce was finalized in March. Claire was 31 years old and starting over, which sounds like one of the hardest sentences in the English language, and which, I discovered, contains within it something surprising. A quality of clean possibility that doesn't exist when you're in the middle of a thing you can't name. She found an apartment in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus, a small, bright place on the 3rd floor with good light in the mornings and a coffee shop on the corner that she walked to every day before work. She repainted the walls herself, a warm cream color, and hung 2 prints she'd bought from a street market. She kept the gold earrings. She bought a new car, a sensible, sturdy Subaru that she paid for herself in cash because she'd been quietly saving in an account Ryan hadn't known about, a small, practical rebellion she'd started in October without telling anyone. I drove up to see the apartment in April, the first warm weekend of the spring. I brought Copperhead, who immediately investigated every corner with an energy that suggested he'd been briefed on the importance of the occasion. Claire made lunch, a salad and a good crusty bread and sparkling water, the kind of simple meal that feels like an event when you're eating it with someone you've been worried about. "You seem different," I told her, somewhere in the middle of that meal. "Different how?" "Less braced," I said. "Less like you're waiting for something." She thought about it. "I think I've been holding my breath for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to, and then I stopped, and it felt weird at first, and then it just felt like breathing." "That's a good description," I said. "Dr. Reeves is good," she said. "She's helped me see some things, about myself, about why I stayed and why I explained things away. It's not a comfortable set of things to look at." "No," I agreed. "Important things rarely are." "She says I'm brave," Claire said, with a slightly self-deprecating expression. I keep arguing with her about it. "Stop arguing," I said. "She's right." Copperhead had settled himself on the small rug by the window with the proprietorial satisfaction of a dog who has claimed new territory. The afternoon light was coming in at an angle, warm and actual, the kind of light that makes a room feel inhabited rather than just occupied. I thought about what the last 8 months had cost both of us, and I thought about what they'd returned, and I thought that the accounting, while it would never be comfortable, was not one that left me in despair. My own life, meanwhile, had changed in quieter ways. I'd been spending more time at the Veterans Resource Center, partly because it needed me and partly because being needed is its own kind of medicine. One of the other volunteers, a man named Thomas Birch, who'd served in the Navy in the 80s and who had the driest sense of humor of anyone I'd ever known, had noticed something. "Gerald," he said to me one Wednesday afternoon in late April, over the too-hot coffee, "you seem lighter lately." "Do I?" I said. "Yeah, like you put something down." "Maybe I did," I said. He nodded, asking nothing further. Thomas had that gift, the one where he understood that some things don't need excavating. I also started, that spring, something I'd been meaning to do for years. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center on Elm Street. 2 evenings a week, a half-dozen people, a patient instructor named Mr. Bellamy, who was approximately as old as I was and had strong opinions about grain direction. I was bad at it at first, which was humbling in a way I'd come to appreciate, and then I improved slowly, which was satisfying in a way that very few things managed to be. By May, I'd made a small walnut box that wasn't pretty but was solid and square and genuinely my own work, and I put it on the shelf in the living room and felt something that I finally, after some thought, identified as satisfaction in its uncomplicated form. Claire's daughter, my granddaughter, Maya, came into the picture in a way that requires some explaining because Maya was not born in any of this story's time frame. She's 4 years old, the child of Claire's first serious relationship before Ryan, a situation that hadn't worked out but had given the world Maya, who is by any measurement a complicated and entirely wonderful small person who asks more questions per hour than most adults manage in a month. Maya spent a weekend with me in May. She slept in the small bedroom that had been Claire's under the patchwork quilt that Helen's mother had made before I was born, and she woke up on Saturday morning and came padding into the kitchen in her socks and stood in front of me with the absolute severity of a child who has already formulated her first question of the day. "Grandpa Gerald," she said, "why was Mommy sad before?" I turned down the burner under the eggs. "Well," I said, "she was in a hard situation for a while, and sometimes when people are in hard situations they get sad." Maya considered this. What was the hard situation? "She was with someone who didn't treat her very well," I said, "and it took some time to understand that and some more time to change it." "Like when Tyler at school takes my crayons," she said. "A little like that," I said, "except grown up and more complicated." "Did you help?" "I tried," I said. "Your mom helped herself, mostly. I just showed up." Maya pulled herself up onto the kitchen stool with the absolute determination of a child who is too short for things but refuses to accept it as a permanent condition. "Showing up is important," she informed me. "It really is," I agreed. She watched me finish the eggs with the focused attention she brings to everything, and then she said, "I think you're a good Grandpa Gerald." "Thank you, Maya," I said. "I think you're a very good Maya." She seemed satisfied with this. We ate eggs together in the morning kitchen, and Copperhead sat under the table in his eternal optimism. And outside the yard was green, and the neighbor's dog had, for once, left the flower bed alone. It was sometime in June, late June, the air thick and heavy with summer, when the letter arrived. Claire called me about it on a Sunday, which was unusual because our Sunday calls had shifted from the slightly tense checking-in calls of the last few years to the easier, longer kind, the kind where we talked about what we were reading or what Maya had said or what Thomas had said at the resource center, and this call began the same way, but then she paused and said, "I got something from Ryan." I waited. "A letter," she said, "handwritten. It came yesterday and I've read it. A lot of times. I don't know what to do with it." "What does it say?" She read some of it to me. He'd written it by hand on plain paper, which alone was notable given the Ryan I knew, who communicated almost exclusively through his phone. He wrote that he'd been in therapy, required as part of his legal agreement initially, but that he'd continued past the requirement because he'd found it was something he needed. He wrote that he understood now, more clearly than he had before, the way he'd behaved toward Claire, toward me, toward the idea of trust in general. He wrote that he was not asking for anything, that he was not looking for a response, that he was writing because he'd been told, and had come to believe, that saying things clearly and directly, even when there was no guaranteed outcome, was better than not saying them. He wrote, "I spent a lot of time deciding that other people saw me as less than I was. The way I talked to your father, the way I dismissed him, was about me, not him. I know that now. He was right to hold his ground." Claire stopped reading. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Part of me is glad. Part of me is angry that it takes a legal process and a therapist for someone to figure out how to be decent. And part of me is just tired, Dad. I'm tired of having feelings about Ryan Carver." "That's fair," I said. "Does this mean I have to forgive him?" "No," I said. It doesn't mean anything you don't want it to mean. Do you forgive him? She asked. I thought about it. About Christmas Eve and the Audi and the parking lot and the car and the 7 months and everything in between. I hold him accountable, I said, for what he did. And I'm glad he's doing the work to understand it. Those two things can exist at the same time without one canceling the other out. A pause. That's very wise, Dad. I've had a lot of time to think about it, I said. She laughed, a real one. I'd been collecting those, her real laughs, since last fall, noting each one with a private gratitude, the way you note the first warm days in March. She wrote him back. She told me she did, and she told me generally what she said, which was brief and honest and merciful, without being inviting, which seemed to me exactly right. And then she moved on, because life requires that, and because she is her mother's daughter in every way that counts. It's October now as I'm telling you this. The leaves on the street outside my house have gone gold and red, and Copperhead has his usual autumn opinion about the cold air, which is that it's personally offensive to him. I drove up to Columbus last Sunday to have lunch with Claire and Maya. We went to the Cardinal Table on Whitmore Street, the same restaurant where Claire and I had sat across from each other in July of last summer, where I'd asked about the power of attorney and she'd put her fork down. We sat at a different table this time, which was probably a coincidence, though I prefer to think of it as something else. Maya ordered a grilled cheese and informed our waitress, with complete seriousness, that she preferred the crust removed, which was news to all of us. Claire ordered the salmon and talked about a small promotion she'd been offered at the dental office, a new title, more responsibility, a raise that was not enormous but was real and earned. She talked about it the way people talk about things they're genuinely proud of, without performing the pride, just wearing it simply. I ordered the pot roast, which was good in the uncomplicated way of things made by people who know what they're doing. At some point during the meal, Maya looked up from her carefully excavated grilled cheese and said, "Grandpa Gerald, will you come to my birthday?" "When's your birthday?" I asked. "February," she said. "I'll be there," I said. She nodded, confirming that this was the correct answer, and went back to her lunch. I looked at Claire across the table and she looked back at me, and neither of us said anything, because nothing needed saying, because we were sitting in a good restaurant on a Sunday afternoon and she was whole and I was whole and Maya was methodically disassembling her grilled cheese with the concentration of someone who takes food seriously, and this, right here, this ordinary Sunday afternoon, was what we had fought for, and it was enough. More than enough. I've been thinking, in the weeks since, about what I want to say to whoever is listening to this, because I did not tell this story for the drama of it. I told it because I think it contains something true. Strength is not always the thing that announces itself. It is not the loudest voice in the room, and it is not the most impressive credential, and it is not the man who talks over dinner about the deals he's made or the salary he earns or the way other people have underestimated him. I know something about being underestimated. I have worn that underestimation like a coat for most of my adult life, and it has never bothered me, because what I've understood for a long time is that the people doing the underestimating are doing you a favor. They show you their cards. They tell you exactly how they see the world. And then, when the moment comes, and the moment always comes, you already know everything you need to know. But I want to be honest about something else too, because this story isn't a story about a father who was always right. I saw things and I stayed quiet. I noticed the dismissals and the small humiliations and the way Claire tensed at a certain tone of voice, and I told myself it wasn't my place, that she was grown, that I might be seeing shadows instead of things. And I was wrong about that. Not wrong to respect her independence, that was right, but wrong to let the fear of intruding override the duty of showing up. There is a difference, and I learned it later than I should have. What I know now is this. Showing up is not the same as taking over. Showing up is the thing that says, I see you. I see what is happening to you. You are not managing this alone. That's all. That's the whole of it. And sometimes, for someone standing in a locked bathroom with their voice made small, that's the thing that changes everything. I know something about the quiet fear of having someone you love inside a situation you can't fully reach. That fear, when you're older, isn't loud. It's cold. It's precise. It gets into the back of your mind on ordinary mornings, over coffee, while the neighbor's dog is in the flower bed, and it stays there, steady and low, until the moment when you pick up the phone and hear one word in the wrong voice and everything accelerates. If you've ever stood in that fear, if you've ever known what it is to love someone and recognize the sound of a word said one wrong way, then you know what I'm talking about. And I want you to know that I see you too. I'm going to close with the thing I believe most completely, the thing this whole long year has clarified for me down to its clearest form. Love is not a feeling you reserve for the easy times. It is a practice. It is a verb. It is the thing you do on the Tuesday morning when the phone rings at the wrong time. And it is the thing you do in the 6 months of paperwork after. And it is the thing you do on the Sunday afternoon when the meal is simple and the child is eating her carefully deconstructed grilled cheese and everything is, for now, genuinely okay. Love is showing up. That's the whole lesson. That's everything I know. Strength isn't winning fights. Strength is answering the phone when somebody's afraid. Strength is 6 weeks of quiet preparation while the other person assumes he's already won. And sometimes, strength is being the pleasant, slightly boring retired electrician that nobody in the room takes seriously, right up until the moment when that turns out to matter. Ryan thought he knew what I was. He was working with incomplete information. If you've made it this far with me, then you already know what I mean when I say that the most dangerous thing in the world is a quiet person who has decided it's time to speak. If this story has touched something in you, if something in it reminded you of your own family, your own fears, your own battles, the ones that don't look like battles from the outside, I hope you'll take 30 seconds to leave a comment. Tell me what you felt. Tell me if you've been in a situation like Claire's or like mine. Tell me if you've ever had to decide between keeping the peace and keeping the person. I read every comment. They matter to me more than I know how to say. Leave a like on this video if it moved you. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories like this one, because I have more of them, and because every one of them is about the same thing at the core: ordinary people doing the quiet, difficult, necessary work of loving each other well. I'm Gerald Holt. I'm 63 years old. I live in Millhaven, Ohio, and I have a beagle named Copperhead, and a daughter who laughs like her mother, and a granddaughter who takes her grilled cheese seriously. And I have never, not once in my life, been exactly what someone assumed I was.